What happened on K2, and why 100 climbers stepped over a dying man on their way to the summit? His cries for help were lost in the cold wind. Why did they leave him behind? This is the scary story of human ambition, cold hearts, and the deadly nature of K2. In the darkness they rose. Over 150 men and women advanced warily through the ice, grasping lines anchored into the mountainside just hours before. Some had waited months for this ascent. They had a small window. Winds had finally calmed on the morning of July 26th, giving teams their first chance to summit K2, the king of mountains, in the Pakistani-administered area of Kashmir. A storm would hit the mountain on the 28th, they were told. It was now or next year. In the vanguard was the rope-fixing team, a hand-picked squad of the strongest Sherpas and guides. Working through the thick snow, they opened a route by securing ropes along the rocky Abruzzi spur, the most common path to the peak. Behind them, a column of headlamps peppered the Pakistani mountainside like fireflies in the fog. Up and up they went. Eager athletes, Nepali Sherpas, Western mountain guides, and their foreign clients. Near the front of the pack was the Norwegian climber Kristin Harila. By sunrise, she and her guide, Tenjin Lama Sherpa, would become the fastest people to reach the world's 14 tallest peaks. Then there was Muhammad Hassan, a Pakistani porter tasked with carrying equipment for the rope-fixing team. The 27-year-old climbed the frigid heights while positioned between the veteran climbers and Harila. They would find him upside down that night, dangling at 27,000 feet, hanging above an abyss, his face buried in the snow. By the end of the summit window, at least 102 people had conquered K2. All paying climbers would descend the mountain safely and regroup at base camp. Mohammad did not. His death would shake the mountaineering industry in the coming weeks and eventually make headlines worldwide. The climbers who summited K2 that day were swept into the heart of a bitter debate. Speculation churned as people argued whether a man more than 8,000 meters above sea level could have been saved from the mountain of mountains, or whether greed for glory had blinded more than 100 climbers and left Mohammed stranded on the ice. The Insider spoke with 7 climbers and mountain guides on K2 that night, including 2 who witnessed the immediate moments after Mohammed's fall. Through further conversations with mountaineering experts and a friend of the dead porter, a clearer picture has emerged of the events that unfolded in that night of confusion and tragedy on K2. Mohammed's employer, Layla Peak Expedition, didn't respond to multiple requests for comment. K2 is no Mount Everest, or rather Mount Everest is no K2. The trite saying is, if you want bragging rights, you climb Everest. If you want respect, you climb K2, said the climbing coach Alan Arnett, a mountaineer since 1997, who is the oldest American to summit K2. Dubbed the Savage Mountain, K2 is significantly more difficult and technical to summit than Earth's tallest mountain, Arnett told Insider. Everest has a 3% death rate, while K2's was 25% before 2021. Arnett estimates it now hovers at about 18% after becoming a far more popular option for climbers. K2 is only 800 feet lower than Everest, but it is incredibly steep, Arnett said. It starts steep, it's steep in the middle, and it's steep at the end. Everest, on the other hand, features many relatively flat areas, such as the western CWM, and the weather is notoriously unpredictable, Arnett said. Western winds charging into the Karakoram range hit K2 head-on, forming swirling gales and increasing the risk of an avalanche. These factors considered, mountaineers wait for winds under 30 km/h, seizing upon those tiny pockets of opportunity to push for the summit. This year was highly unusual, with only one day during the season, July 27th, when the winds were low enough, Arnett said. The climbers who were on K2 concurred. The information that we got going up was that the 28th would be a pretty bad storm, said Lucy Westlake, who attempted to scale K2 with a US company, Madison Mountaineering. Most teams believed July 27th was the last day of that window to summit, Westlake said. And with almost every climber thinking they had only one shot, summit hopefuls flooded the way up. Oswaldo Freire, an Ecuadorian mountain guide with the Nepali Group 7 summit treks, told Insider he counted at least 41 tents at Camp 3, this season's final resting point before the summit. That many tents easily meant 120 to 160 people were gathered for the push, Freire said. A mountaineer for 31 years, Freire was part of the rope-fixing team carving the route between the lower and upper camps. Seeing the severe weather and the people needing space for shelter, the veterans gave up trying to construct Camp 4 on the shoulder, a plateau traditionally used as the launching point for summit pushes. The risks on the savage mountain were compounding drastically, Freire said. Snow had fallen days before, leaving barely enough time for it to pack and provide solid footing. Those who wanted to reach the summit would have to climb from Camp 3, up a deadly wall of ice and rock known as the Bottleneck, then alongside a steep traverse, before hiking 2 more hours up 60-degree terrain. And with every additional person climbing the trail at night, the danger of avalanches or rockfalls had risen significantly. "I'd be scared to death," Arnett said. When he summited K2 in 2014, only 10 people were pushed to the peak the same day. Sensing the danger, Freire was on the verge of packing his equipment and descending from Camp 3. He ultimately decided to take the summit push, wanting to help Westlake, his friend and the youngest American woman to conquer Everest, break the same record for K2. They would try for the peak, but agreed to assess conditions as they ascended. As the afternoon came on July 26th, scores of climbers departed Camp 3 for the peak. According to Freire's estimate, Mohammad and the rope-fixing team would have been among the first groups to move before 3:30 p.m. Harila's team, consisting of her, Tenjin, and a Brazilian cameraman named Gabriel Tasso, started their push at 8 p.m., she said. Just days before, they had finished an ascent on another 8,000-meter mountain in Pakistan Broad Peak. Freire and Westlake left at midnight, hoping the delayed start would provide hours of buffer space between them and the other teams, thus making the climb safer. They were wrong. At about 2 a.m., Harila suspected something was amiss. She had reached K2's giant serac, a monstrous ice cliff hanging off the side of the summit, some 300 meters below the peak. Ahead, the rope-fixing team was making time, but the few climbers in front of Harila had stopped. To examine the cause of the holdup, her team started passing other mountaineers to reach the front of the line, Harila told Insider. Her account of the events that immediately followed was corroborated by footage seen by Insider, alongside an interview from another climber on a separate team. This other climber was at the front of the entourage and asked to remain anonymous, citing the death threats Harila had received in recent weeks. The climber will be referred to as Doe, but their identity has been verified and is known to Insider. One of the first 3 people in line on K2, Doe was one of the first few to see the porter close to death. They could make out a figure stuck below the trail through the dark. At some point we heard somebody saying, as though something was wrong. We went ahead and I saw this person hanging upside down with his belly uncovered, Doe said. Mohammad had fallen on a precariously steep section of K2 called a traverse, where slopes are slanted to about 70 degrees and spill far below. Roughly 2 hours from the summit, it spans between 50 to 100 meters across, and climbers must walk, balancing on the side of the extreme incline to reach their goal. The porter hung there unable to help himself, about 5 meters beneath the trail, Doe said. A companion of Mohammed's stood farther down the mountain path, seemingly unsure of how to mount a rescue. He too was a porter for the rope-fixing team. Insider has identified the man, but isn't publishing his name because of privacy and safety concerns. Doe saw that an ice screw holding the fixed ropes had come loose near Mohammad, indicating that it may have been yanked out as he fell. Doe added that his Jumar, a handheld device for gripping fixed ropes, still dangled from the lines anchored above. Why Mohammad was incapacitated after falling just a few meters is still unclear. At 8,000 meters and above, altitude sickness can take hold, or pulmonary or cerebral edema when fluid fills the lungs or brain. Pre-existing medical conditions can also become fatal in the mountains. With Mohammad upside down, his clothes had begun to slip and gather around his upper torso, exposing his lower abdomen, Doe said. His legs were twisted in the ropes, Harila added. His clothing also seemed odd to both climbers. Mohammad wasn't wearing a down suit, vital equipment for 8,000-meter mountains that covers the climber's body to keep them warm, Doe said. You didn't climb K2 without one, several mountaineers told Insider. We weren't sure who this person was or even if they were a he or she, Doe said. I was wondering why this person was between us and the rope-fixing team, because we thought we were the first batch of clients. Harila also said Mohammad had neither a down suit nor supplemental oxygen with him, which is another essential piece of equipment for high-altitude climbs. He didn't have a regulator or mask or bottle. We didn't see him before and didn't know if he had it earlier and lost it, Harila said. But there wasn't any sign of oxygen there, and he didn't even have gloves at the time. Harila said she and her team decided to help Mohammad, since they were some of the strongest climbers and Sherpas present. Doe remembers the same. As a Sherpa's client and not an experienced mountaineer, they said they focused on ensuring they did not get in the way. My biggest contribution would be to make sure I'm not the cause for another rescue, they said. The attempt would take hours, and the already exhausted rescuers had to move cautiously, especially since an ice anchor had become unsecured. The treacherous slopes continued hundreds of meters below, and if anyone were to come somehow loose, death would almost be guaranteed. Early into the rescue, a young Sherpa attempted to add another ice screw but slipped in the fresh snow, both climbers said. He was visibly shaken, both recalled. Harila, Tenjin, Taso and several Sherpas worked to add the ice screw, secure additional lines on Mohammad, turn him around, and pull him up 1 inch at a time. Think about pulling a 150-pound bag, Arnett said when assessing the rescue attempt. More than likely he was virtually unconscious, if not unconscious. He was unable to help himself. You're at what, 8,300, 8,400 meters? You're using supplemental oxygen, he said. You've got your goggles on, it's the middle of the night. She, her Sherpa and her photographer. This was now their 5th 8,000-meter mountain in 2 weeks. Doe took a photo of the scene. The image was taken at 2:15 a.m. per a timestamp seen by Insider. Harila's team shot its own footage, also seen by Insider, of climbers assessing Mohammad's fall. In the footage, Mohammad's companion can pitch in, helping to hold ropes. As the veteran climbers hauled Mohammad from the slope, the porter was at least partially lucid and cried out as though he was not in good shape, Harila said. She added that Taso gave Mohammad his oxygen mask and tried to calm the man. Meanwhile, rows of people were forming behind Doe. When I turned back, I saw the huge queue behind. I was trying to move 1 step back. Nobody could move, they said. Minutes later, the avalanche struck. It was about 3 a.m. when Westlake and Frere arrived at the shoulder, the plateau that would have served as Camp 4. The route was jammed with climbers. As soon as we crested, you could basically see this line of headlamps going up the mountain, Westlake said. Most of the people going to the summit were right there. Frere recalled the confusion on the radios. We started hearing on the radio about an accident, he said. He remembered hearing that someone had fallen from the path and no one could get him up. Along the chain of climbers, anxiety was beginning to set in. The rescue was blocking the climbing entourage, and Mohammad had fallen just beyond what is known as the Bottleneck, a steep rock gully 100 meters tall and considered the most dangerous part of the ascent. And almost every climber was now stuck inside the Bottleneck or at its exits. It sits just under the Great Serac, making it especially unsafe when slivers of the ice cliff break off. Arnett said that debris from the Serac can get funneled into the gully, giving the Bottleneck its name, sweeping away fixed ropes and killing essentially anyone caught inside. When that sliver falls down like it did in 2008, it just wreaks havoc on everything below because you've got tons of ice, and it's falling down with massive velocity, Arnett said. 11 climbers died in the Bottleneck when a section of the Great Serac fell in 2008, marking one of the mountain's worst disasters. The trick there is to get through the Bottleneck as quickly as possible, Arnett said. The climbers could have spaced out and descended to wait, yet they did not, or could not. The size of the crowd in the Bottleneck, the inexperience of many client climbers there, the dark of the night, and confusion over Mohammed's fall made it difficult to organize a dispersal. Sometimes people get this thing that's called summit fever, said Frere, the Ecuadorian climbing veteran. That you think because there's a lot of people you are safe, because everybody's kind of doing the same thing. But you're not. At the shoulder and peering up into the night, Westlake and Frere had little idea of what was transpiring on the traverse, much less how Mohammad had fallen. Frere surmised the group at the top might not have brought extra ropes, which would greatly assist a rescue. He decided to clip around the climbers on the Bottleneck and bring the gear up. But as Frere was gauging the distance to the top, Westlake saw the rumbling snow. Lucy asked me, "Is that an avalanche?" Frere said, and I looked up and saw the white wall of snow coming at us. The avalanche missed the bottleneck, avoiding mass catastrophe, and was filled only with powdered snow that washed onto the climbers at the shoulder, including Westlake and Frere. By the time the avalanche subsided, Westlake and Frere were covered up to their knees. They called off their summit push. Other smaller avalanches would occur that night, and at least 3 Western companies would abandon their climbs because of the risk, bringing their clients back down the mountain. Among those who returned early were Wilhelm Steindl and Philipp Fleming, Austrian mountaineers under Furtenbach Adventures, who later made the allegations that shocked the world. Back at the top, Harila's team received radio calls from the rope fixers. "The fixing team was around the corner where the avalanche came from," Harila said. "We got in contact with them on the radio, and we heard they had problems." There were now 2 potential disasters needing attention. It was 3:30 a.m., about 90 minutes since Mohammad was found on the traverse, but the hostile conditions meant he was still not pulled out of harm's way. So Harila's team split up. She and Tenjin moved ahead to check on the fixers, while Tasso stayed to help finish pulling Mohammad, she said. Doe, who said they remained with the other climbers on the traverse, recounted the same sequence of events to Insider. Tasso eventually brought Mohammad to the path with Mohammed's companion and another Sherpa. But the porter could no longer speak or move independently, Doe said. "That's when we realized, oh shit, this is bad," Doe said. "Even if you carried him with 5 or 6 people, I can't see a way without risking other people's lives to actually do a rescue." Meanwhile, Harila said she and Tenjin met with the fixers farther along the path and realized they were unharmed. The controversy stems from the next moments. With Mohammad moved onto the path, the jam began to open up. Doe said their Sherpa scouted ahead and, seeing a clear route, ushered them forward on the traverse. The atmosphere was tense. Other climbers, who had waited hours under the Great Serac, were eager to escape danger. The entourage pressed forward while Tasso stayed with Mohammad and his companion, attempting to warm up the porter. But about a half hour later, Tasso's oxygen, which he shared with Mohammad, was almost out. An extra bottle was with Tasso's Sherpa, who was part of the rope-fixing team approaching the summit. So Tasso left to find him, while Mohammad's companion remained with the dying porter. At 4 a.m., the morning sun broke on K2. Climbers along the traverse began shooting videos of the breathtaking, bleak beauty of the mountainside. In one video by Insider, a man in a green jacket is seen tending to Mohammad, whose legs appear to move, indicating he may still have been alive. The unknown man's jacket and boots match the clothes of Mohammad's companion, as seen in the photo provided by Doe. Flamig and Steindl, the Austrian mountaineers who turned back at the shoulder, shot drone footage of the traverse while they descended. They were horrified when they reviewed the shots in base camp the next day. The drone footage showed dozens of climbers one by one walking past Mohammad's body on the path. Insider saw a still of the footage. To Fleming and Steindl, the mountaineers' code of ethics was being violated before their eyes. Speaking with Insider, Steindl said an attempt should have been made to bring Mohammad down as soon as possible. But if a rescue mission had started at this point, the people behind the traffic jam, they have to turn around and go down, he said. Nobody would reach the summit. I don't know if you could bring him down alive, but there must have been a rescue mission, he said. If someone is dying, it's quite normal to stop the expedition to bring someone down. They did not stop. Clients from at least 5 climbing companies completed summits by the month's end. Harila would break her world record, and Doe would crest K2's peak for the first time. At the summit, Tasso caught up with Harila and Tenjin and told them Mohammad was alive but in bad shape, Harila said. Harila added that she received word from her support team via satellite phone that everyone was okay. But when she descended and returned to the traverse, Mohammad was dead. His companion was nowhere to be seen, she said. As it turned out, the earlier expected storm to sweep the area on the 28th never came. A few remaining mountaineers successfully climbed in the following days, bringing the total number of summits this year to at least 102. But back at base camp, Mohammad's death still hung over the minds of the climbers, many of whom said they learned he was a local porter only when they returned. Some people were traumatized because they had to pass him when he was agonizing, Freire said, recalling what people said at base camp. He was trying to reach out to people, and so everybody talks about that. Death is a stark reality climbers face when attempting any 8,000-meter mountain, and it's even more likely for those who dare to attempt K2, Westlake said. But it was the conditions and the circumstances around this, where everyone walked past a man that was still alive and was dying, who died a few hours later, Westlake said. That's a big deal. Several expeditions held summit celebrations for their clients, though 5 climbers on K2 told Insider the overall mood was tepid. Harilla said her team did not celebrate at base camp. Steindl was aghast. A guy died. Those people who are partying now, they were stepping over him to reach the summit, he told Insider. They are celebrating the success now. You cannot be serious. Fireworks were used, Steindl said, a detail that other climbers on K2 confirmed. They added that the displays were small. Still, the celebrations deeply disgusted Steindl. It was completely crazy at this point, Steindl said. I was just happy to leave base camp. Steindl said that on their way down to civilization, he and Fleming met a friend of Mohammed's family, who told them where the deceased porter's family lived. They, Tasso, and a 4th climber traveled to the village of Tisar to offer their condolences. Now, as Mohammed's past comes to light, questions linger as to why he was even sent to scale that mountain. Mohammad was a father, leaving behind 3 young boys and a widow, the climbers learned. His wife probably won't be able to find work in their traditional Muslim village, and his mother, whom Mohammad cared for, has diabetes, Steindl said. When we went there, it was heartbreaking, Steindl said. He said he'd left all of his cash with the family and promised to care for their education. The Mountaineer launched a GoFundMe for Mohammed's family, which has since raised $150,000 for their legal fees, schooling, and future expenses. Mohammad, known as Hassan to his friends, was a shy, quiet man in his early 20s when he first met a Norwegian hiker named Jutta Vanessa Turkel in 2017. She was visiting the Karakoram range with her husband, and Mohammad had worked as one of the porters for their team, she told Insider. The couple struck up friendships with Mohammad and the other porters, who all lived in extreme poverty and made arduous treks to base camps while woefully under-equipped. While other porters could be jovial or mischievous, Mohammad was keenly aware of his low social status as a poor villager in Pakistan and would always bow and smile and obey the instructions of others, Turkel said. This was Mohammad's first year being assigned at high altitudes on K2, or any 8,000-meter mountain for that matter, Turkel said. It made no sense to her that he would be told to join a summit push. He should never have been anywhere up there, she said. He could have learned to go to Camp 1. Porters are no Sherpas. Where Nepali Sherpas are suited to life up in the mountains, many porters in Pakistan come from surrounding villages below base camp at far lower altitudes. Mohammad typically worked ad hoc construction jobs in the Shigar Valley and traveled to the 8,000-meter mountains every climbing season. Like his fellow porters, he was paid less than $70 over 3 weeks to carry equipment to base camps. It was big money for men like Mohammad, Turkel said. If they were lucky enough to be hired as high-altitude porters tasked with ferrying loads to the upper camps, they could earn as much as $20 in a single day or $840 during an extended season. On one hand, they become happy and think, "I will earn 6,000 rupees per day," Turkel said. On the other hand, oh shit, I have to climb K2. Climbers like Freire would often be alarmed by how ill-prepared porters seemed, even among those who went only to base camp. To be light, they don't bring much stuff for themselves, Freire said. He said that some often carry loads up to base camp in sandals, arriving with bleeding feet. You see them a lot with altitude sickness. You see them with a lot of problems in people that are not experienced or well prepared to be at that altitude, Freire said. It's kind of an unwritten law that you cannot trust the Pakistani high-altitude porters to deliver the loads, Freire added, because they can get cold or get scared, which is totally normal. Porters don't have even the most basic sets of equipment, such as gas canisters or stoves to make water, and expedition teams would give them whatever spare supplies they could scrounge up, he said. They often sell their base camp equipment to make more money for their families, Turkel said, though she added that the porters she befriended wouldn't dare sell precious gear for high-altitude work. And porters are not part of any expedition team, working like freelancers. Truth be told, you can help them. We help everybody, but you cannot be responsible for them, Freire said, because you are responsible for your members, for a lot of logistics to work around. Kara Hydri, the secretary of the Alpine Club of Pakistan, a sports NGO that governs the local mountaineering scene, told Insider that high-altitude porters typically have expertise up to roughly 7,000 meters. However, he said some might be trained for higher elevations. When asked about Mohammed's equipment, he denied that porters were often unprepared, saying they would have down jackets and oxygen. Expedition teams hire porters through local companies, which relay instructions to their men and choose who is a base camp porter and who works at high altitude, Turkle said. Mohammed's employer was Layla Peak Expedition, founded by twin brothers named Akbar and Anwar Syed. A porter teammate of Mohammed's told Turkle the high-altitude porters were given $750 this year to buy equipment. For reasons unknown, Mohammed did not have a downsuit, Turkle said. Days before the summit push, another high-altitude porter with Mohammed had called Turkle from Camp 2, saying the pair was too under-equipped to carry on. The porter and two other Pakistani porters quit, but Mohammed kept going. It was his first time being paid as a high-altitude porter. It's easy for us to judge them as crazy, Turkle said. I wouldn't do it, you wouldn't do it, but what choice do they have? With his inexperience on the mountain and lack of proper equipment, it's unclear why Mohammed was sent up to assist the rope-fixing team at an altitude above 8,000 meters. Being a rope fixer is the hardest job on the mountain, veteran climbers like Freire said, and with paying clients waiting just behind them, the fixers on K2 would have been under immense pressure to open the route quickly. Freire said that Sherpas and guides navigating the treacherous terrain would have neither time nor headspace to watch out for a porter. They never have a chance. They are told what to do, she said. They have learned all their life that there is a hierarchy. But even if the local men knew they faced grave danger, most of the men Turkle knew would tend to obey the orders of their Pakistani bosses. She said that most are born of low status and are sometimes treated like disposable resources in the local community. Layla Peak Expedition and the Syed brothers didn't return repeated requests for comment and calls. When contacted on a local line, Anwar Syed told Insider to reach him on WhatsApp. The number, however, was not registered on WhatsApp, and further attempts to reach Syed and Layla Peak Expedition were directed to automated voicemails. Freire told Insider he saw a Russian company, Seven Summits Club, telling fixers at base camp that it couldn't spare any Sherpas or guides for the rope-fixing team. Instead, they offered 3 high-altitude porters for the job. Mohammed, under Layla Peak Expedition, was one of the porters assigned. Alex Abramov, the founder of the Seven Summits Club, confirmed that his company had contributed 3 high-altitude porters to the fixing team, reported Explorers Web's Angela Benavides, a climbing journalist well known in the mountaineering community. We don't know what happened because he was ahead of our members and Sherpa group, Abramov said of Mohammed's death per Explorers Web. The Seven Summits Club didn't respond to calls and requests for comment to Abramov and its Alaska and Moscow offices. On social media and its website, Seven Summits Club wrote that at least 10 of its clients and guides conquered K2 in July. The expedition team didn't appear to address Mohammed's death in video shot of its triumphant arrival back in base camp. "We are waiting for the heroes at home," the club wrote on July 31st. As news spread of Mohammed's death, along with the mourning footage of the traverse, the climbers on K2 quickly became the target of the online world's fury. Steindl and Fleming gave interviews to Austrian newspapers, stressing that Mohammed should have been rescued. Harila, the most prominent climber of the day, became a lightning rod for online hate and the subject of rife speculation and misinformation. This included an unsubstantiated allegation that she was one of the climbers filmed walking past Mohammed's body, though she was already past the traverse at that point. She would release a statement on August 10th, explaining the events of that evening, but by then, the damage was done. She said that she'd received death threats and that her and Tenjan's legacies had been marred, possibly forever. Sajid Hussain, the deputy director of the Sports and Tourism Department of the Gilgit-Baltistan region, said an investigation was launched into Mohammed's death, and its findings would be submitted on August 22nd per the Associated Press. In an email to Insider on Tuesday, the Tourism Secretariat of Gilgit-Baltistan wrote that the committee's inquiry was underway. A final report will be made public by the end of this month, the email added. The report was published on September 5th. The exact cause of Mohammed's death has still not been determined. Harila stands by an assessment she said she'd reached that night, that it was impossible to carry Mohammed down K2. "It's not like on Everest," she said. "I shouldn't say it's easy on Everest, but it's not like climbing on K2. To carry someone across the bottleneck, it's impossible." She added that the sheer number of climbers in the way of rescue would have posed a serious risk as well. Arnett agrees. "It's night and day from what goes on in Everest," he said. "Pragmatically, it would have taken 4 to 6 people using a makeshift sledge, perhaps from a sleeping pad or bags, to drag Mohammed down," he said. While a helicopter has landed on Everest before, Arnett added that it would be nearly impossible to drop a long line to a spot above 8,000 meters precisely, and Mohammed would need to be brought to Camp 2 or 3 before he could be airlifted out. Sherpas are paid thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars to do body recovery or rescues on Everest, he said, but nobody has been dragged from that altitude near the Traverse and the bottleneck. The rocks in the bottleneck would cause serious damage to the body, so rescuers would have needed to lift Mohammed off the ground while descending the gully. Then they would need to bring him down to the shoulder, then down to Camps 3 and 2, while navigating the Black Pyramid, a landmark along the way that's infamously difficult to cross, even for an able-bodied person, Arnett added. "Could it have been done? It's not out of the realm of possibility," Arnett said. But he added that many Sherpas, known for jumping in to help, had been on the mountain that day, and none started a rescue effort, most likely because it was too dangerous. "And I know a lot of these guys," Arnett said. "I just for the life of me do not think that they would have looked at him and said, 'Oh, he's a Pakistani, leave him.' I totally reject that." Reflecting on the ascent, the climbers who spoke to Insider continue to wonder whether Mohammed might have been saved if only one risk factor had been removed. Could they have organized a rescue if fewer people had pushed for the summit? Or if they'd known the impending storm wouldn't arrive? What if Mohammed had worn a down suit? What if there had been a Camp 4? Freire disapproved of how no one tried to bring Mohammed down, but said he understood it was a mammoth effort. "First of all, you would need everybody turning back, then maybe going up again to rescue," he said, and then making everybody understand that the rescue situation needs to have priority over the summit. "But it's very difficult to do crowd control," he added. "Unluckily, I think nobody was there with sufficient authority to say, 'We are all going down.'" Westlake felt that with so many veteran mountaineers on K2 that day, the key difference maker could have been someone taking charge of the 150 people on the slopes. "I don't know if they even would have been able to bring him down," Westlake said, "but I do agree that it seems like there should have been some sort of more organized effort to help him." An indelible stain and a source of shame for the mountaineering world. Steindl said he worried for the future of mountaineering. "I think the system up there failed, because nobody felt responsible," he said. "That's the big thing. You have to stop and say, 'Nobody is passing this point. You turn around and we bring him down, we try to help him.'" "Fatalities on the ascent could easily have been much worse," said Arnett, who spoke reprovingly of the teams that pressed on despite the dangers. "Had an avalanche hit the bottleneck that night, dozens would have died." "They were incredibly lucky. They dodged a bullet," he said. Arnett said the accident on K2 has deeply ashamed many in the mountaineering industry. He lamented that respect for the sport was fading, if not long gone. Commercialization of the 8,000-meter peaks, where companies flood the deadly mountains with manpower to pave the way for amateur clients, has led to a rise in less experienced and more dependent climbers, he said. And though Pakistan's mountaineering industry is decades behind Nepal's, K2 is becoming a hot spot like Everest for tourists seeking a hardened challenge. "We've crossed the Rubicon because there's no way back because of this greed," Arnett said. Turkle hopes Mohammed's death will spur change in the industry and plans to approach famous climbers and expedition companies to join a petition for a fair trade certificate. Those obtaining it must ensure their porters are given the right equipment and pay them a portion of the money they receive from clients. Arnett believes governments should limit the number of mountaineers permitted to attempt a summit, especially on K2. He said that all parties involved, porters, clients, and guides, must be fully aware of all the specific dangers the mountains present. If you go to an 8,000-meter mountain and you don't think that you might die, then you shouldn't be there, he said. You've got to understand that this is the bargain you're making with the universe. And so the dark day on K2 ends. Over 100 climbers reached the summit, but a dying man was left behind, his cries lost in the icy wind. This haunting tale shows the cost of ambition and the cold nature of both the mountain and the human heart. K2 stands as a deadly challenge, holding the memories of those who climbed and those who were left behind.